Truly unprecedented, historic scenes playing out in the White House Oval Office.
We have many people that feel they're being persecuted and they're coming to the United States. So we take from many locations if we feel there's persecution or genocide going on. I must tell you, Mr. President, we have had a tremendous number of people, especially since they've seen this. Generally, they're white farmers, and they're fleeing South Africa, and it's a very sad thing to see.
However, President Cyril Ramaphosa insists that his delegation was successful in persuading the Trump administration to see things from their perspective.
Issue that he kept raising, or he raised prominently, is the issue of genocide. And when he was asked by one of you, and thank God one of you asked, whether he was convinced that there was genocide, he says no, he's not convinced. Much as he flighted the video and all those press clippings. And in the end, I do believe that there is doubt and disbelief in his head.
We've convened a News24 panel to dissect the SA-US standoff and where it leaves us as a country.
It wasn't a great night out for South Africa, but it's not only doom and gloom.
I think these are people who push power and ideology over reality.
I think it's an opportunity for us to start firmly changing some of the fundamentals that have gone wrong over the last 20 years.
Join News24 Editor-in-Chief Adriaan Basson, Assistant Editor for Investigations Pieter du Toit, Deputy Business Editor Ahmed Areff, and me, your host, Graeme Raubenheimer, to discuss all this and more on a very special edition of The Lead on News24.
To stay tuned to The Lead for every edition, hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels.
A very good day to you, gentlemen. I think let's start with you, Adriaan. Before we put this panel together, I sensed a lot of, I don't want to dare say anger, but a lot of irritation after you and I had spent most of last night watching the scenes unfold from Washington, right?
Hello, Graeme and colleagues. Looking forward to this discussion because I've got a lot on my mind, and I think it's good to debrief about after historic moments like this. Look, these are the kind of stories we live for, right? I mean, so let's not beat around the bush. I mean, it was incredible to be part of this story, to have covered our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, in the White House. I mean, South Africa, really an inconsequential country in the biggest stage of world politics. I mean, there's no reason why Donald Trump should have hosted the president of South Africa there. But we also know that Trump likes these theatrics, so he obviously wanted to make a point. But it was incredible to cover the story. It was specifically special to have News24's business editor, Helena Wasserman, in the room with Donald Trump and Cyril Ramaphosa. She's written some fantastic articles on News24 this morning about how exactly it felt to be there in the moment. And yeah, this is one of those stories that we will remember for the rest of our careers and that we will probably one day write about in our memoirs. So I know that's not the question you asked me, and I'm not trying to avoid it. Look, Graeme, I woke up this morning, I'll be brutally honest, I woke up feeling quite down. I felt a sense of a country adrift. And it's stuff we knew. It's not new stuff. We know we had a crime problem. We know we have a poor government that don't deliver basic services that the country requires them to do. We know that we have a fragile government of national unity. We know that we have a racism problem still. But to see those things in such stark light broadcast onto the screens of the rest of the world and onto the front pages of all the major newspapers in the world was quite a thing, and it left me feeling a bit adrift. I wish we could say to Donald Trump last night, we have a plan to deal with crime. Crime is coming down. We are creating jobs. We are receiving investment from across the world. But none of the things are happening, if we be brutally honest. So, we can spend an hour talking about what an absolute piece of annoying person Donald Trump was and why he's wrong to call our call it a genocide, etc. And we should go there. We should have that discussion because it's important to call Trump out. He is the president of the USA. But I think that's probably the easy discussion to have. I think we should have a harder discussion after last night about the future of our country.
And look, the sort of beginning of it all, we were sitting here watching in our respective newsrooms and thinking, oh, it's seemingly going quite well from a PR perspective for the president and Team South Africa. There weren't any necessarily major sort of attacks in the room a la Volodymyr Zelensky and what the Ukrainian president had addressing down in the Oval Office. And then the next minute, suddenly this video gets played of Julius Malema, the EFF leader, singing Dubulo Bunu, Kill the Boer. And suddenly I think it looked as if President Cyril Ramaphosa was suddenly taken off guard. Pieter, you wrote the very first take that, us sort of digesting everything that we had seen of those events last night. When that video came on, do you feel as if Team South Africa was caught off guard, or did you feel like President Cyril Ramaphosa may have had an inkling that this sort of thing was going to happen?
Look, Graeme, writing the first take, the danger obviously is that the morning after, when you wake up, like I did on Thursday morning, is that your thoughts evolve and you start thinking about stuff a little differently to what you were thinking in the heat of the moment and immediately after. I think when that screen was rolled out, I think it was pretty clear that our president was in a very tight and a difficult spot. He was certainly and visibly uncomfortable. He looked quite taken aback and he looked quite shocked. And I think the impact of that video, the singing Kill the Boer, Dubulo Bunu, the way in which the ministers who were accompanying him didn't know how to react to it, the way in which Trump used the theater to advance the points he wanted to score was difficult viewing and it was difficult watching. But in the cold light of day, as Adriaan said, I think we need to consider some things. We need to consider the state of the country. We need to talk about, the inordinately high levels of crime that all South Africans suffer under. And I wonder, and it's a question I'm asking myself, and I've been asking this of myself since I woke up early this morning. Have we grown too inured to crime? Have we grown too isolated from what is really happening on grassroots level? Have we simply accepted that this is our way of life now? Living behind high walls. We at News24 write about the struggles and often the collapse of the criminal justice system every single day. If you see what colleagues at the investigations team, my team, is writing about how the murder of Babita Deokaran is still not solved. We still don't know who ordered the hit. The rot at the very top of the South African police service, the Hawks, the struggles that the NPA have to put people behind bars. And it was difficult to see it exposed in the way it was on the international stage in the Oval Office at the hands of someone like Donald Trump, who is someone, guys, let's be honest, he really doesn't care what's happening in South Africa. He doesn't care about what happens in this country. He really doesn't care about the state of society or the economy. This was all about theater, and he was playing to his audience. That's what it was about. But when you strip all of that away, we've got some serious problems in this country. And I think it was sobering, upsetting, and angering to see all of that playing out on the global stage that was the Oval Office. But the video was dramatic, Graeme. Getting back to your original point, I think our president was taken aback. He was caught off guard, and I think he could probably have prepared some better answers around that. I do think, as Helena Wasserman wrote on News24 this morning, there is an acknowledgement by the president that he could have been prepared better.
Sure. Ahmed, go for it.
Jump in for a second. So I appreciate the fact that we're actually having this discussion now, because it would have been very easy for us to get caught up in the theater and the drama and the kind of messaging that Trump wanted to build and how that kind of played out. And as we all mentioned, the reality is crime is a fundamental problem in our country, and it was laid bare in front of the whole world. And it's highly possible that that debate could be completely subsumed by the white farmer thing, which is what the narrative is. And I think it's our job, and which is why we're doing this now, to kind of fight back against that. And I think, like, even though I think you feel that your first take might have kind of been just kind of reactionary, and now that you've kind of considered it, there might be more to it. But I do also feel that what you felt in that moment, Pieter, was what you felt in that moment, you know? And now that the way the debate moves is how we move, and we've considered everything, and now we're going, okay, our wounds were on display to the whole world. Now let's try and figure out how to actually solve that particular problem, because everyone knows it's a problem now. We've always known it was a problem. We were just kind of numb to it. It's just a way of life. And I think by and large, it was specifically designed to embarrass him, to embarrass Ramaphosa and embarrass the delegation. I think even though some of it worked, some of it did not, I think we kind of avoided the embarrassment, even though the narrative now is like Trump ambushed him and Ramaphosa was taken aback, and he was. Clearly he should have prepared more for this, you know. But I think a lesser seen side of Cyril kind of popped up in that moment. He tried to be very diplomatic. He tried to butter him up a lot. He knew how to. Clearly, they briefed him. This is how you approach this guy. You know, be jovial, talk golf, do this, give him a gift. You know, but I think when the moment the masks came off, I think Ramaphosa himself specifically kind of held it together well, and I think they wanted it to kind of devolve into a Zelensky shouting match, and it didn't to that extent. You know,
but Ahmed, I think we can hold very different thoughts and views about what happened last night, because all those things are true, right? There's not one narrative from last night. It wasn't a match between Ramaphosa and Trump, and one won and one lost. I mean, we shouldn't be drawn into that binary analysis. We can say, Pieter, I won't speak on behalf of you, but your first take last night said, you know, Ramaphosa was good, and I thought he was very good. You know, specifically at the first half of the engagement, I thought Ramaphosa held his own. He was good. He didn't take the bait. You know, he kind of he was very statesmanlike. I saw an international headline a few moments ago that said, "I never thought I would be a Ramaphosa praise singer, but here we are." There was only one statesman in the Oval Office, and it wasn't Donald Trump. We can say that, and we can say how absolutely obscene it is that the only thing that all the South Africans in that room agreed on was that we are all the victims of terrible crime, and not only white farmers. I mean, that was literally the biggest unifying message in that room, was from Zingiswa Losi, the president of COSATU, to Retief Goosen, agreed that we have a terrible crime problem that doesn't discriminate against any race, gender, class, or creed. I mean, if that is our biggest...
Do you think that should have been what we should have been discussing? Should we have punted that as hard as we did?
But I think the message wasn't clear enough, because obviously everybody's coming with their different backgrounds. They're coming with their different contexts, their different views. You have two golfers that are, you know, very rich men, and you've got Johann Rupert, who has stuck around in South Africa for the longest time. And those two golfers, they have homes in Florida, right? And they're all coming with different contexts and different backgrounds, but none of them were singing from the same concise hymn sheet to say that crime affects everybody across the board. And if you look back at it, Johann Rupert and Zingiswa Losi were in actual fact the only two to really try and get that sort of message across the line. John Steenhuisen was also, he gets a number of credit for also bringing context into the room and to try and sort of turn around this big narrative. Ahmed, for you, who do you think stood out as the best speaker, if you will, out of the lot? I, for me, feel that it was Zingiswa Losi, because she was the only real sort of woman in the room, right? Here we have all these other men who are very influential businessmen and a lot of money behind their names.
Look, I agree that Zingwisalosi was fantastic. She spoke very eloquently. She articulated her point really well. And I think she didn't let the moment of being in the Oval Office like scare her. She kind of stood up and said what she needed to say in that moment. I'm going to do something that I never thought I would ever do, and I'm actually going to praise John Steenhuisen. Look, he could have phrased things a bit better, I think. I think the way he kind of, I think he was clearly nervous. And I wonder if Ramaphosa beforehand told him, I'm going to throw to you, John, I'm going to tag you into this wrestling match. But I think the moment Ramaphosa threw to him and John started talking, there was a distinct shift in my mind. I don't know if everyone else kind of felt that way, because obviously the engagement with this was just Trump and Ramaphosa for the longest time up until that point. But I think by opening it up and starting it specifically with John, and John kind of painting the GNU idea and talking a lot about that, I think that painted the country in the best possible light. Especially him talking about the GNU, him talking about the fact that we're working together, we're a coalition government, him actually being agriculture minister, saying I was at Nampu, this is what happened, this is what our farmers believe. I mean, it was, sure, the one thing, Ramaphosa is a farmer, he should have at least mentioned that at some point, I think. But, I mean, Steenhuisen representing kind of that demographic in that sense, with the job that he has, I think he brought a sense of like purpose and eloquence that I never thought I'd actually see John Steenhuisen do on a global stage.
And energy, Ahmed, because there were times where the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, had felt like he was struggling to get to his point quick enough. And it also feels with US President Donald Trump and the rest of his entourage, they want to stay with they're not going to change their minds. They're sort of sticking. They already know what the conclusions of what their thoughts are. And you have Steenhuisen coming across, and he sort of very, very quickly tries to get to the point that he's trying to make. AB, let's bring you in here as well. Best speaker for you in the room?
Yeah, I didn't really think about it like that. I mean, I thought a number of people brought something to the discussion. So I thought Ramaphosa was good. I thought he was statesmanlike. I thought he started well. I was disappointed in that he didn't speak straighter about the crime in South Africa and the fact that we don't have white genocide, but we have terrible crime problem. I thought you could have buried that issue. He, as head of state, could have buried it. Okay, then he went to Johann Rupert and John Steenhuisen to help him on that. And I thought they all contributed to say, well, as I said earlier, crime, or in Johann Rupert's word, crime affects people across the board, not only white farmers. I thought, but the team wasn't as coherent as I thought they should have been.
Yes.
And afterwards, Ramaphosa admitted that they didn't have a pre-briefing. That I think someone like Retief Goosen only met them at the White House for the first time at the Oval Office. And I mean, Goosen did nothing for South Africans' case. I mean, he came there to say how bad crime is and how his family has been affected, which is his story to tell. But I mean, is that the story that Ramaphosa wanted to take into the Oval Office? Probably not.
Yeah.
So, I felt there could have been better cooperation or better prep between the parties. And also, we never heard from Park Stow, and this entire mission was supposedly about trade, to get trade back. We now read this morning from Helena Wasserman's story that, we were actually sent back to the drawing board on Monday when we presented our first package on trade to them. And the Americans said, no, we want more. We want more on tariffs about our imports to South Africa, things like pork and beef. So, I asked myself this morning when I woke up, so what happened? What actually did we get from last night? Is there anything we got out of it? Is there any wins? I struggle to find one.
Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa then came out with a media engagement and said, quote unquote, it's now sort of, there's a little bit of doubt that exists in Trump's mind about the alleged sort of genocide within the South African context. I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I feel like Trump's probably going to stick to his narrative here. We saw it on full blast. Yeah. He struggles to change his mind.
We have to talk about this, so let's do it now. The genocide is absolute nonsense.
100%.
We've said it over and over again. Carl Cowan, our investigative journalist this morning, had a fantastic story again showing that this figure called Sebastian Jooste, Twitter boss, was actually the source or behind this video that Trump showed last night. So incredible that the right-wing South African social media gang could influence the most powerful head of state in the world to that level that he shows a video in the Oval Office. I thought, yes, if that was the only mission of last night, we probably succeeded. I think between Johann, Rupert, Zingisa Lossi, John Steenhuisen, Ernie Els, and Cyril Ramaphosa, they hopefully said enough on a world stage to convince Trump, or the world at least, that there's no specific attack on white farmers. But we knew that. We knew that if you live in South Africa, you know that. You know that crime doesn't discriminate, that crime affects all of us. So what now? What next? And I think that's my that's kind of the feeling I woke up with today is, how do we go forward? What is the vision here? What's the plan, Mr. Ramaphosa, President Ramaphosa? What's the bigger plan here? What's the plan to create jobs? It's not good enough to go with the same platitudes we've heard for the past 7 years since he became president. So we need foreign investment. Yes, my kids know we need foreign investment, but where is this foreign investment? Where is it going to come from? How do we address things like high taxes and red tape and BE that are some of the issues that investors raise the whole time? Where is our, it shouldn't take us being bullied into an Oval Office meeting with Elon Musk lurking on for us to maybe consider changing the BE requirements for foreign investors. It shouldn't take. We should be more innovative. We should look to countries like Ireland, what they did in the 90s with the Celtic Tiger moment, or to Singapore, to see, these countries have been innovative. They were deeply economically depressed and somehow managed to find innovative ways out of that. And Trump doesn't need to help us. And I don't actually think we're asking for technological help with fighting crime and, investment, but it stayed there on the surface. Peter, I don't know if you guys disagree with me, but it felt very superficial. There was no deep discussion about building cars in Roslyn, or, there was no meat.
Look, one or two things. The first thing, Adriaan, you touched on it, was how utterly disappointing, embarrassing, frustrating it is to be summoned onto the red carpet in front of a bully like Trump, and to have to account for all manner of things in front of Trump, Musk, Hegseth fans, having to defend domestic policies, having to defend South African society and where we come from and the challenges that we have. But what's worse than that is that we put ourselves in that position. And you talk about the last 7 years, but you can take it back to 2007 when the Polokwane moment happened, because I think since Polokwane, we have made enormous mistakes, or this government has made enormous mistakes. And, you can just look at the annual reports from the Auditor General about the state of municipalities, or, delve into the Zonda report about the way in which corruption has become institutionalized. The fact is that, Ahmed, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we've been growing at less than 1% annually GDP for the last 12 years. Those are problems that we caused. Those are our problems. It wasn't caused by some other meteorite hitting the world or a natural disaster. It's because of poor government and misgovernance over the last 15 years. So we put ourselves into that position. We put ourselves at the mercy of the spectacle and the political theater that Donald Trump wanted to achieve on Wednesday night in the White House. And you're right. We've become tired of these superficial discussions which we see in Parliament or during the debate about the budget or wherever it may be. We've become tired of these superficial solutions that never really lead anywhere. And now we're confronted with a brutal reality that, from the outside looking in, South Africa last night in Washington, guys, it looked bad. You looked like a basket case. We did look, we might not disagree with the video and, the way in which we were portrayed, but that's how it looked. That's how it plays on the world stage. We need to take ourselves out of that position so that we aren't subjected to that type of publicity. It's our fault. We need to get out of it. And I hope and I wonder whether it will be a moment of reflection for this government when they fly back from Washington, D.C. and land at Waterkloof Air Force Base sometime today. And they think, shit, guys, we need to make a plan with crime. We really need to look at the police and the Hawks and the NPA. Do we have enough resources? Do we have the right people? Should we not perhaps collapse the police force and start from scratch and build something new and really look at rural safety and safety in townships, safety in urban areas? We all live in homes, Ahmed, in Johannesburg with 3-meter high walls. Yeah. That's not normal, guys. And I think we've become used to our ways of living in South Africa.
Totally desensitized.
That's not pretty, and we don't want that.
Yeah. And what I fundamentally agree with, right, is that we were completely embarrassed, or we were laid bare, right, and I think nothing is going to change. I'm a deeply pessimistic person by nature, but I do think nothing is going to change. I don't think they're going to. I mean, we were embarrassed, probably on their behalf. I think they were embarrassed in the moment. I think the way they presented it when Ramaphosa came out in the beginning saying we kind of changed his mind, things are looking better,
and they're probably coming back thinking in a defiant mood, saying, stuff Trump.
Yeah, no, and the thing is, it's this weird balancing act. We kind of need to placate the guy a little bit, which is why they kind of butted him up and all of that, because we do actually need that investment, and we do actually need the tariffs to go down, and we do need some trade deals and stuff like that. But I mean, I'm not advocating that we move past America, because we can't. They're the biggest economy in the world. We need them, but it also came across very kind of weird when we went there, like, please help us. We need your help. I don't know if they were playing to like Trump saying, okay, cool, we want to be the people that help you.
But he didn't respond to that.
But he didn't respond to that.
Didn't.
But it was kind of like, we need you. Please help us. You're the only one who can help us, I don't know if that was the right way to play that also,
He was deeply insulting towards South Africa. And I would argue racist towards our president. I mean, he was clearly much more enamored with the presence of 3 white men in Johann, Rupert, Retief, Goosen, and Ernie in his office than the head of state of South Africa, of Africa's largest economy.
But Adriaan, that's to your point that it was superficial. I mean, he craned his neck to hear what Ernie, Retief, and Johann was saying, but there was just simply no interest from him to actually engage with Ramaphosa. I can't recall whether or not he even looked him in the eye.
No, he was quite irritated with him, and when he pulled out his little amateurish documentary courtesy of Twatterbars, he was annoyed that Ramaphosa wasn't looking at the wall the whole time, and he was incredibly patriarchal and condescending, I thought, towards Ramaphosa. And credit to Ramaphosa again, this is a man who's been through, it had a hell of a life, he's spent most of his adult life in apartheid South Africa as a black man, first mine worker, mining organizer, labor organizer, and then in politics. And it must have been pretty painful for Ramaphosa to hear some of these things. He didn't want to go there last night in the Q&A session, and that is part of our story. But I do just want to come back to this point of nothing will change, Ahmed. And look, I mean, we can talk later about things that are changing and that have changed in our body politic, because I firmly believe we as a country must change things, and we must now take hold of this country. But just 2 signs of that. I mean, Ramaphosa at his press conference last night saying, "Oh, that wasn't a dramatic. Sorry if you guys thought that was going to be a dramatic briefing with Trump, because it wasn't dramatic at all." Well, it was. And secondly, a very senior government communicator messaged me this morning to say our editorial this morning, in which News24 lamented South Africa's crime rate and said that, if there's one thing out of that briefing, that this unifying message is that crime is out of control, and that we actually need a reset, Mr. President, about crime in South Africa. That we simply cannot accept 75 murders per day, 128 rapes per day. We cannot normalize that. And this government communicator sent me a message this morning saying, well, America is also very violent. And just yesterday, 2 Israeli embassy members were shot dead in Washington, D.C., a few streets from where we were. yes, that's terrible. But just Google for like 10 seconds the difference between our murder rate and theirs. America has 7 out of 100,000 people per capita that gets murdered. South Africa has 45. That is a massive difference. We are one of the murder capitals of the world. And, if a senior government communicator doesn't know this and doesn't want to accept this, and doesn't want to confront this, then we are in trouble.
That's why Johann Rupert was a bit of a breath of fresh air, right? Because he actually turned to Steenhuisen and said, amongst the highest murder rates in South Africa is found in the Cape Ganglands, in the Western Cape, which Steenhuisen's DA party is obviously in governance there. And I thought that was very refreshing. And actually, a lot of the commentators gave Rupert a little bit of kudos for pointing that out, because many people had felt going in before this big scene in the White House that has been left out of the equation when we talk about crime affecting, not obviously just white farmers, and to dispel that notion. And in actual fact, the worst levels of crime are seen indeed for more than 250 years. But Cape Town gangs have been circling with this issue.
I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that it was a great moment, because that's not the type of conversation we should be having in the glare of the White House. That's a conversation we should be having domestically. Why hasn't Johann Rupert picked up the phone and called Alan Winde about crime in the Western Cape?
Sure.
Or has he? And what has Alan Winde done about it? My point is, Graeme, we're not having these discussions in South Africa. In fact, we don't even have press conferences with Ramaphosa in South Africa.
Yeah,
this
that
was
is the
probably
problem.
the best chance that a journalist from South Africa had to get a reaction from their own president last night in the White House.
Or a one-on-one, yeah.
Not in Pretoria. That is a problem.
If Adriaan, if that government if that's the message from the government communicator, and to latch on to what Ahmed said, I find it difficult to believe that this government delegation is going to come back and they are going to sit down and take a long, hard look at themselves, because the history tells us that they don't do that. That this government doesn't. This ANC-led government does not do that. And I am wary that they will come back in a much more defiant mood than in a that they'll rather be defiant than come back and say, let's take a long, hard look at ourselves and let's redesign the criminal justice system where it needs some reform. Because we haven't. I mean, we have had discussions about crime in the past. We have had discussions about our poor economic growth rate, which actually lies at the heart of this thing. Because if we don't create jobs, if we don't get economic growth, then the direct result from that is higher crime rate. So we're not seeing those hard decisions being taken. Ever since this GNU has taken office, it feels like it's been business as usual. The ANC have said as much, that many of the policy decisions taken in the previous government will now be executed by this current government. So I'm not seeing the urgency or the commitment by certainly the ANC component in government, which has been the governing party for the last 30 years, to fundamentally start addressing the core problems that we've got, and that's low economic growth, which leads to unemployment, which leads to crime. Now we're on the world stage, embarrassed, like Ahmed said, and it was tough. And Adriaan, you're right. I mean, having discussions about high crime rates on the Cape Flats, Singiso Losi saying that, black women being raped and murdered, Retief Goosen saying, friends of my dad they've been murdered. That's not the type of thing that you want in the Oval Office. So let's prevent that. Let's prevent it from happening again and start talking about what is at the core of our problems. And those are economic problems. And we need a fundamental reset, in addition to a fundamental reform and redesign of the criminal justice system.
I'm curious, who do you think that responsibility will fall to? Because clearly government is not going to do it. We obviously have to hold them to account. So Adriaan Basson there, he obviously wasn't in the meeting, but there was a representative of business. how much do you think a role business has to play in doing that? Or does it fall to us, the media, to be able to hold them to account that way?
It falls to the voters, doesn't it? I mean, the voters need to decide in what type of country do they want to live. And then they need to match their expectations and what they want with this party who are making a specific value proposition to the voting public. But as far as business is concerned, I think they've done what they could. I mean, you've got these work streams in the presidency. You've got Operation Vulindlela that are looking at the criminal justice system, logistics, looking at energy and so on and so forth. But it's also not their role to usurp the functions of state.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, the buck stops with the head of state, the president. You know, why do we have Operation Vulindlela who are working around certain ministers who are unable to do their jobs? That's a problem.
Yeah.
Pieter, can I just talk to you about, I mean, let's just take one example, right? The security work stream in Operation Vulindlela, where business and the presidency now works together. Yeah. They were supposed to build this crime laboratory. You and I actually visited the head of business against business against crime 2 years or so ago. And there was this big plan to build this massive high-tech laboratory where basically if any criminal is arrested and they've got his or her phone, they can literally just plug this phone into this magic system and almost like CSI Miami. And it will show you the entire history of this person and give you all the evidence you need to convict this person. 2 years down the line, Pieter, I don't think a brick has been laid. My understanding is that there's still fighting between who's going to oversee this. Can the private sector give money to policing? And in fact, every time the private sector wants to help, for example, getting Paul Pretorius and the state capture documents and making that accessible to the MPA, there's this hell of a fight in these institutions and from the MK and the EFF that, you know, we just can't have private. So nothing is happening. We don't see progress, you know, and this is just one example of where we are cutting our own faces. I mean,
you're absolutely right. I mean, we've been writing about this digital forensic laboratory for what feels like years, and there was an initial momentum or push shortly after the Zondo Commission's report was finalized to really get stuck into reforming the criminal justice system to help the National Prosecuting Authority, to help the Hawks. But Adriaan, there's so much distrust between the different arms or that constitute the criminal justice system. The Hawks don't trust the police. The SAPs don't trust the NPA. The NPA trusts no one. The Ministry of Justice has a political role to play. You've got various vested interests that know that once the full documentary trove of the Zondo Commission is brought to light, that many other people will be probably be investigated and prosecuted. So the problem is that the system isn't working, and the problem is that I don't think we have the political leadership, Adriaan, Ahmed and Graeme, that shows the urgency and the commitment to really tackle the scourge of crime, organized crime, white collar crime, which is really brought this country to the brink of becoming what some people are saying a failed state. If your criminal justice system doesn't work, if there is no accountability for crime and misdeeds, you know, what hope do anyone
and your economy
have
can't grow
to survive? So I think the example of the promise that big business made to the NPA to help them with a digital forensics lab 2 or 3 years down the line is the perfect example of where business tried to help, but because of infighting in government, a lack of urgency and or commitment, it still hasn't happened yet.
Pieter, of course, just bringing it back to the scenes we had seen out of the White House, and of course the expose or the exclusive on News24 this morning that, you know, investigations team with Carl Cowans now in fact found that video that played in the White House was of course coming from the X account of Twitter boss. There has been a lot of commentary on, you know, X. It's pretty much a cesspool social media site these days. A lot of the right-wing extremist commentary is going, hey, finally there, Trump has now given the South African officials, the president, the what for here. There's been some sort of questions around, so what if the video has come from Twitter boss? Kindly remind our listeners why it was so important to expose Sebastian Jooste and that account, because essentially he was in Elon Musk's ear and allowed those EFF videos to get a lot more amplification on social media.
Well, Graeme, you just perfectly explained the public interest in the Twatterbaas story and expose. I mean, when we wrote our first Twatterbaas story, we tried to explain as clearly as we could what the problem statement is, in that you've got someone who has been running an anonymous Twitter account for a number of years, distributing a mix of mis and disinformation into the right-wing ecosystem in the United States, where it was picked up by Elon Musk, where it was picked up by Donald Trump, and Donald Trump then told the world that there was genocide happening in South Africa on the back of the messaging coming from Twatterbaas. And what was remarkable last night when we saw that video playing out in the Oval Office, I was wondering where this came from, and lo and behold, it was lifted and came directly from the Twatterbaas account. We don't know whether he made the video, but he certainly published the video on its site, from where it was picked up by a second person, and that second person who republished the Twatterbaas video was then the source for the White House's video last night. So it shows you the direct line that someone sitting in the Western Cape has to the most powerful people in the world, who then amplify that and then spin their own tale based on that video.
Peter, to kind of jump on that, I'm very curious on your take. What do you think is the end game of the people who are kind of more right-leaning, the people who push the white genocide
in South Africa?
In South Africa, what do you think they want? Because clearly facts don't matter in this circumstance. Clearly, you can see in the White House, facts don't matter there either. Right? But what is the end game? What do they want to actually happen?
I think it's twofold. I think first is it's a clear attempt to undermine a democratically elected government. I think many of them are diametrically opposed to the fundamental tenets of democracy, and are opposed to the 1994 settlement, opposed to the transition period. So there's a definite and clear attempt to undermine the legitimacy of this government. We might not agree with their policies, and heaven knows I don't agree with many of their policies, but they are a legitimately elected government. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think it's becoming clearer, and it has become clear over the last couple of months, that many of them want a separate type of Volksstaat for many of their followers. They want a form of self-determination, they want their own services. They want to provide and receive their own services separate from the rest of the country. And I think for many of them, the debate that was had between 1990 and 1993, when the interim constitution was finalized, we're seeing that rear its head again. So it's about undermining the legitimacy of the government in order, I think, to force some form of self-determination.
If I can come in at this point, look, I think that I'm trying hard to take some wins here out of last night. So some positives. So firstly, I think the work that Pieter and his team has done over the past few weeks in exposing Twatterbaas, and again this morning, is incredibly important. It's incredibly important to expose the lie of a white genocide that Donald Trump has perpetuated. And I do think, and I want to believe, I still believe in a world of facts and a world of rationality, and I do want to believe that there was someone in that room last night from the United States side, whether it's Donald Trump or some of his advisors, that would hopefully, after last night, listening to the likes of Rupert and Steenhuisen and Lossie, say, okay, guys, maybe we are wrong on that one. Maybe let's dial it down on white genocide. Let's rather talk about their crime problem, which is clearly something that they all agree on. I think that was a win. I think it was good. And I think we all, when that executive order came out on the 7th of February, I think we all kind of was shocked to see how a lie had made it into an executive order of the United States of America's president to say that white Afrikaans farmers are at the mercy of criminals because they're white. That's just not true. And I think there was a win on that last night. At least in the eyes of the world. If you look at all the major newspapers this morning, New York Times, the Financial Times, the Times of London, the Washington Post, the Independent in the UK, they've all published articles about Trump's lies. Julius Malema,
Unsubstantiated.
and Trump just lies. He just portraying Julius Malema as a government executive is just not true. Julius Malema is the leader of a minority party that support is in steep decline.
100%.
The last polls by the Social Research Foundation showed that the EFF is on 6% support. That makes him one of the smallest parties and probably the 5th or 6th largest now in our parliament. So for Trump not to even give that context is entirely untruthful, unethical, and malicious. Secondly, those white crosses next to the road that Trump showed was, and we've published a debunking disinformation piece this morning, so did the New York Times. Those crosses were planted after one farm murder in KZN, a terrible farm murder that never should have happened. But it was one farm murder. It wasn't the burial site of thousands of farmers as Trump wanted the world to believe. So I think we've called out his lies, and the world media has called out his lies, and that is important because we need to continue living in a world where facts and the truth still matters. The second win, I think I think we can kind of take, and the proof will be in the pudding, is the G20. It did seem to me like Trump was no longer absolutely against coming to the G20 in November. He is probably entertaining the idea now of coming. I spoke to some people in that delegation last night who said they think they've got Trump to come to the G20.
I saw that as well, yeah.
They've convinced him. So that would be a win for South Africa. I think it would be deeply embarrassing if he didn't come because we are handing over the G20 to America. So I think that would be another win. But you know what? It kind of ends there for me. Ahmed, I don't know if you think there's been a win on the trade side and economic side. You can tell us now. But I think for me, just the last thing I wanted to say, and this is probably the my parting shot in this whole thing. And when people become all negative about the country, I do want to remind people that we had an election last year where the ANC, after 30 years of government, got 40% of the vote. 4 out of 10 people who voted for the ANC. The other 6 voted for other parties. The ANC is in decline. These polls are showing that the ANC, particularly under a possible President Mashatile, is going closer to the 30s.
I saw 25% headline projection.
They're probably a bit low, but they are not in a good space. South Africans have seen through the ANC. South Africans are tired of the ANC. South Africans have stopped voting for the ANC. That is a big part of our story of where we are today as a country. That's why we have a government of national unity. That's why John Steenhuisen could say that last night proudly in the White House, that through the DA's participation in the GNU, they are keeping the likes of the EFF and the MK out of government. The question is obviously what will fill that void led by the ANC, who will pick up those voters, because people stop voting for the ANC, but they haven't taken up a new party. Will it be the Democratic Alliance? Could they become more palatable to the majority of the country, or will it be another party? And I think that's the future that we should be talking about now. So just to maybe end on that note from my side is I think it wasn't a great evening. It wasn't a great night out for South Africa, but it's not only doom and gloom.
Final words, Ahmed and Pieter, asseblief.
Okay. I know Adriaan hoped that someone in the Trump delegation would at least listen. I mean, I doubt it. That's how I feel. I think these are people who push power and ideology over reality. And I think whatever doesn't fit their narrative, they're going to completely discard. What I do think would probably benefit us in the long run is, I think we went there with the idea that we need to kind of reestablish things so that we can sort out our trade situation with the country. We need investment from them. How that'll happen, the details of that, I don't know how that's going to pan out. But I think it was the first step for a longer kind of trek to kind of get to where we need to be with the USA. And I mean, as reprehensible as some of these people are, we're going to have to work with them, and we kind of need them, whether they base their decisions on reality or not. And I think at some point South Africa has to give in to some stuff, and they're going to have to make some concessions. What those are and how they going to affect us as a country, I'm not sure yet. But again, not to completely displace America, because we do need them. There are other countries and other markets we do need them, but I think we need to think and kind of box clever with them a bit. And I think this was the first step in trying to do that. And I think despite the surprise and despite everything that went down in the Oval Office, I do think that they, at the end, we don't know what the details of that lunch were, but I'm hoping that it's kind of opened the door for us to kind of reestablish some ties, and hopefully that'll actually benefit us in the long run. I'm hopeful of that, at least.
Let's hope they spoke more than just golf. Pieter, final word?
Well, I'll keep it concise and brief. One, I think Ramaphosa carried himself with a great measure of dignity in the face of quite some severe attempts to embarrass him on Wednesday night. I think South Africa on Thursday morning was quite battered and bruised. I think the country came out worse for wear after that meeting. But I think we need to take a long, hard look at ourselves, and I think it's an opportunity for us to start firmly changing some of the fundamentals that have gone wrong over the last 20 years. And I hope government takes that opportunity. I think as far as News24 and News and Facts, Adriaan, is concerned, I think we need to go very hard at a dysfunctional criminal justice system, and we need to, if we can play our part in letting the public know what the actual state of the criminal justice system is, we need to do that, and I think that's our task.
We should reset South Africa.
Oh, well, there you go. Right, it puts us all on full blast to change the South African trajectory as we know it, and that's only a good thing because history was made last night, whether we like it or not. Whether you think it was another episode of The Apprentice or whether you're not, you think it was a historical masterclass, this will go down in the annals of history as the most unprecedented moment that we've ever seen in South African and US relations throughout the scope of time, and I only think good can come of it, and at least it offers also an opportunity for us to hold our leaders to account, to want for better for all of us in this beautiful country that we call South Africa. Editor-in-Chief Adriaan Basson, our Assistant Editor for Investigations, Pieter du Toit, and Ahmed Areff, our Deputy Editor for Business. I really do appreciate you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us on The Lead. Let's do this again soon. I love these panel discussions.
Thanks, Graeme.
Well, thank you so much for listening. It's been such an engaging week, a busy 2 weeks, in fact, on the news mill. It started on Monday with Has Vusi Kat Matlala run out of lives? We spoke to Jeff Wicks, investigative journalist, about Vusi Musi Kat Matlala, of course, this very controversial Gauteng tenderpreneur businessman who had been arrested for an attempted hit over in Bryanston about 2 years ago. He's since been taken into custody for that, but he's also brought into question now with corruption investigators looking into his involvement in his company getting a very questionable SAPS health services tender. If you want to go back to Monday and have a listen to that, that's such an important conversation about how to expose corruption, why it's so necessary in today's day and age. On Tuesday, we spoke to Nick Wilson about some of his notes from the Nampo Festival, the Harvest Festival, deal or no deal, Ramaphosa ready for Trump. We spoke about whether or not Ramaphosa and Trump could in fact strike a new trade deal. That's an interesting sort of precursor. And then, of course, yesterday, budget cuts, a fuel levy increase, and South Africa's debt crisis. I sat down with Carol Payton, specialist journalist, writer at large here at News24, and we went through all the main sort of points, highlights from the budget. We got some engagement in our comment section from Wotan. He wrote in response to yesterday's episode, the fuel levy is a great idea. Of course, we know that petrol and diesel is going up by 15 and 16 cents. And Wotan writes, this means that the taxi industry must pay as well. And we had some replies to that comment. Just won't to say said, no, not the industry, the users are going to be paying, who will in turn ask for higher wages. Those who use buses or have their own cars will also feel like the hike in fuel levy. Not only at the pump, but also for the items that are transported. It's like a VAT hike. End result, less money to spend, less money to grow the economy. Cuts on the wrong items, rather cut entertainment and not education. While we appreciate all your engagement in the show this week, who knows what we're going to be covering next week? Well, my name's Graeme Raubenheimer, and so long as there's news, we'll of course always have the lead.